Hey guys, welcome back to CCL Biology, the channel for easy to understand biology lessons. If you're looking for help with general, AP, or college introductory biology, then you are in the right place. I am your friendly bio nerd. Thank you so much for tuning into my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about chemical groups. So if you want to get a better understanding of chemical groups, then stay tuned. While you're here, don't forget to hit the like button and comment below if you find this video to be helpful. And if you want more easy to understand biology lessons, then be sure to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell to get updates about new videos that go up every week. Okay, as I said, this video is about chemical groups. We're going to look at 7 chemical groups that are really important in the field of biology. Now, carbons and usually hydrogens form the base of organic compounds. That's referred to as the carbon skeleton, the arrangement of the carbons and hydrogens within that compound. Now, some organic compounds have only carbons and hydrogens, and those are called hydrocarbons. But once we start adding other atoms like oxygen, sulfur, or phosphorus to a carbon skeleton, then we're not going to have a hydrocarbon anymore. Now we have more complex compounds, and they're going to vary in their structure and their function, or how they're shaped and how they behave. Atoms that are added to a carbon skeleton are often referred to as chemical groups or R groups. Now, these groups can influence the carbon skeleton by changing its structure or its shape, or they can affect the way that that skeleton or that whole organic compound is going to behave during chemical reactions. In other words, they can affect its function. Now, chemical groups that specifically determine the function of the organic compound to which they're attached are called functional groups. Now, like I said earlier, there are 7 chemical groups that are important for biology, and we're going to take a look at each of them now. Although you likely won't be asked to memorize these depending on what level of biology you're in, it's good to be familiar with the structure and the behavior of each of these groups. So let's get started. Now, I'm not going in any particular order, but the first chemical group I want to talk about is the hydroxyl group. All right, so this consists of 1 oxygen atom and 1 hydrogen atom. It's typically written as a -OH, but it can also be written as HO. It really just kind of depends on where the group is sitting within the carbon compound. Now, when you add a hydroxyl group to a carbon skeleton, it forms an alcohol. That organic compound is then considered an alcohol, which is a term we should all be familiar with. So most alcohols end in OL, like ethanol, propanol, butanol. So here's an illustration, well, a structural formula illustration of butanol. Okay, so we see the carbon skeleton with the carbons and the hydrogens, and then we have this OH, okay, added. Now notice the OH is not going to be, right beside each other. There's a bond in between that oxygen and hydrogen, just like there's a bond between any other 2 atoms. So butanol is used in plastics, it's used in cosmetics, and it's the source of fuel. All right, the next chemical group is the carbonyl group. Now, this consists of 1 carbon and 1 oxygen atom that are bonded with a double bond. So it's typically written like this up here. You're going to write it out. Now, carbonyl groups can join a carbon skeleton in 2 different places, and the name of the compound that results depends on where that carbonyl group joined the skeleton. I know that sounds a little tricky, but just stay with me. I'm going to break it down for you. If the carbonyl group joins the carbon skeleton with an internal bond, meaning it's not at either end of the skeleton, then the compound is called a ketone. If the carbonyl group joins the carbon skeleton at the end of the skeleton, at either one of the ends, then it's called an aldehyde. So carbonyl groups can be called either ketones or aldehydes. They're both organic compounds with carbonyl groups. The difference is just where the carbonyl group is positioned. Okay, so those are fun names. I know, ketone and aldehyde, probably not what you're expecting. But one way that you can remember which name goes with which position of the carbonyl group is this. A is at the front end of the alphabet. And remember, an aldehyde is going to have the carbonyl group at the end of the skeleton, at either end. And then K is in the middle of the alphabet. And a ketone is going to have the carbonyl in the middle, or at least internally within the carbon skeleton, not at the ends. Now, ketones tend to end with the suffix tone, T-O-N-E, and aldehydes tend to end with al, like propanal or ethanal. So here are some illustrations. All right, so in this case here, I see 3 carbons. And notice here we have our carbonyl group, our carbon and our oxygen double bond. Now this carbonyl joined this skeleton internally. It's not here at this end, it's not here at this end, it's internal. So this is a ketone that we're looking at. Here, this illustration is a little more complex, but we can still spot the carbonyl group. So remember what I said earlier about how sometimes carbons and hydrogens are left out of the illustration. So this angle, anytime you see an angle, even if it's not in a ring, anytime you see that angle, that's a carbon. So this is a carbon here that's double bonded to the oxygen. That's a carbonyl group. All right, so this one is at the end. Now you may be wondering, how can that be the end? I see this hydrogen here. Remember, when we're looking at the carbon chain, we're looking only at the carbons. So not really considering the hydrogens as the end. So because that's the last carbon, this is the end of the carbon chain. So because we have the carbonyl here at the end, this structure is an aldehyde. All right, so these are 2 organic compounds that both have a carbonyl group. This one is a ketone. This one is an aldehyde. Now, one other thing to notice with this, notice that carbonyl groups bring their own carbon in. All right, so before this carbonyl came here, we were looking at ethane with 2 carbons. All right, because this carbonyl group joined, now we have 3. All right, same here. Once this carbonyl joined this compound, it added a carbon. All right, so I just want to note that. So the hydroxyl that we looked at earlier, it doesn't add a carbon to the compound. It comes only with oxygen and hydrogen. But the carbonyl group does add a carbon to the compound. All right, the next group to look at is the carboxyl group. And this consists of 1 carbon, 1 hydrogen, and 2 oxygen atoms. It's typically written as COOH. Now, if carboxyl sounds like a cross between hydroxyl and carbonyl, that's because that's what it is. All right, so let's look at the structure of a carboxyl group. All right, so we're just paying attention to this part. The R just signifies the rest of the compound, whatever else is attached. But just looking here, so we have COOH, and one of the oxygens is double bonded. All right, so let's break this down a little bit. This OH should look familiar. This is what we saw with the hydroxyl group. That's a hydroxyl. And this carbon-oxygen double bond should also look familiar because we just saw it with the carbonyl group. So we have a carbonyl and a hydroxyl that come together essentially to make a carboxyl. That's what this is. Now, when a carboxyl group is added to an organic compound, that compound is typically called a carboxylic acid or an organic acid. And these puppies can also become ionized, which essentially means they can go from being a neutral molecule to a charged ion. So how does that happen? That happens if this hydrogen that's attached to the oxygen breaks away, if that bond is broken, and the hydrogen separates from the group and it takes its proton with it. So that leaves behind a negative charge. So here we're looking at the ionized form of a carboxylate with a COO negative, and this is called a carboxylate ion. Now, carboxylic acids, as you can tell by the name, act as acids, meaning if they're added to water or an aqueous solution, they're going to give that solution an acidic property. And that's because of these hydrogen ions that they're going to release in that solution. So another video that you can reference is my acids and bases video, and you can see what I mean with the hydrogens being released and how that makes a solution more acidic. The next group is the amino group. This consists of 1 nitrogen atom and 2 hydrogen atoms, and it's typically written as NH2. Sometimes you may see H2N. Again, just depends on where it's attached. Now, amines tend to partner up with the carboxylic acids that we just saw before because amines act as bases in solution. So we just said that carboxylic acids act like acids in solution. Amines act like bases. So just like carboxylic acids can become ionized, amines can become ionized as well. But the way that they do it is different. So what we just saw with the carboxylic acids is that they become ionized when the hydrogen breaks away from the oxygen and takes its proton with it. So essentially it releases hydrogens. Amines do the opposite. They become ionic when they pick up hydrogen. So they're picking up the hydrogen with that extra charge. So that's going to take it from NH2 to NH3. All right, so here are some examples. This one may be a little hard to see, but again, here we have NH2, and again, the R is just whatever else there is in the compound. All right, and then here, so we see this carbon bonded with the hydrogens, and then we have this NH2. So here's our amine group. But if you look, what else do we have here? We see COOH. This is a carboxyl group. So what happens when we have an organic compound that's both an amine, because it has an amino group, and a carboxylic acid, because it has a carboxyl group? Well, in this special case, we put both names on it, and we call it an amino acid. All right? So this is an example of an amino acid, which you may have heard of before. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And I'll talk more about proteins in another video. Next is the sulfhydryl group. Now this consists of one sulfur atom and one hydrogen atom, and it's typically written as SH. Now compounds that have this sulfhydryl group attached to them are called thiols. And again, that's probably not what you were expecting. That TH comes from theon or thion, which is the Greek word for sulfur. And then the ol is kind of like the OL that we saw with alcohols, which remember are OH. So this is SH, so we get thiol. All right, so here are some examples. We have mercaptoethanol. Okay. And again, see it ends in that OL, but this would be considered a thiol because it has that SH. And then dithiothreatol. So we have two sulfhydryl groups here. Next is the phosphate group. This consists of one phosphorus atom and 4 oxygen atoms. Now this can be written as PO4, the -2, or more correctly as OPO3 with the -2. Now the way I have it written here first is technically more correct because it indicates that one oxygen is kind of separate from these 3 oxygens here, which is actually the case. So if we look at this illustration of this phosphate, we have our phosphorus, and you see 3 oxygens that are bonded to the phosphorus, each with a single bond. But then the 4th oxygen is bonded with a double bond. So that's what this is indicating, that one of the oxygens is not quite like the other 3. So, but you could see it written as OPO3 or PO4, both with the -2 charge. They both mean phosphate. So just another illustration here. See the phosphorus with the 1, 2, 3, 4 oxygens, one with a double bond. Now, compounds that have the phosphate group attached are called organic phosphates. All right, last but not least is the methyl group. This consists of 1 carbon atom and 3 hydrogen atoms. And it's typically written as CH3, although sometimes you may see H3C. Now this one is different from the other 6 that we talked about because this one is not a functional group. So that means it doesn't really affect the behavior of whatever compound is attached to. Typically methyl groups act more of like a name tag. A lot of compounds within an organism can be identified with a methyl group. So when you have compounds that have methyl groups attached to them, those are typically called methylated compounds. All right, so again, maybe a little hard to see there, but there's the carbon with the 3 hydrogens, CH3, and then we have this structure here that has a whole bunch of methyl groups attached. Okay, so there you have it. Those are 7 chemical groups that are really important in biology. You probably, again, don't need to memorize them, but you do want to be pretty familiar with their structure and kind of have an idea of what they do. So if you do memorize them, it won't hurt, but you're going to see it come up a lot as you take higher and higher levels of biology. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope it was helpful for you. If so, please let me know by leaving a thumbs up in the comment section below. And if you have any remaining questions, then please type those in the comments and I'll do my best to provide you with an answer. Thanks again so much for watching CCL Biology, that is Christ-Centered Life. God bless and bye-bye.